Little Sabres chatter here with Chad DeDedominicis, who joins us on the Wester Hotline chat of Expected Buffalo, the Expected Buffalo podcast, and expectedbuffalo.com as well. Chad, good morning. Jeremy and Joe, how are you today?
I'm good. How are you guys?
How'd you like the lottery?
It was good. It definitely had me on the edge of my seat, especially when they were still in the last pick.
Yeah.
I was a little annoyed that they went away from doing the second lottery live.
Yes,
I realized in the bottom right-hand corner, like, they already picked 3 balls, and people were talking still. But other than that was pretty good.
Yeah, Weeks was interviewing, I don't even remember who it was, from the Islanders.
I think Constantine or somebody like, yeah, the group was talking, yeah.
Yeah, while the second pick, especially in a year where, I don't know if the casual observer would have known this, although I feel like for a broadcast like that, you're more geared towards the hardcore fan anyway, that might have known this isn't a year where 1 is even maybe that different from 2, right? Like, I don't know, going into the night, it felt like pick 2 was almost, to me at least, it felt like pick 2 would almost be as much of a win as pick 1.
Yeah, no, for sure, you're right. So that was only a little annoying part, but other than that, I think they did a really good job.
Well, the Sabres land at 9, which, I mean, the joke I think people are having a good time with is that they had a better chance to move up to number 1 than they did to move down to number 9. But here we are, number 9. And, Chad, it might be year 7 or 8 or 10 of trade the pick. So, I mean, you would have fielded this question before. Looking at the draft class, looking at what the Sabres might want/need as we start to set a course for the offseason, how likely do you think that is? And if they were to do it, you know, what is it they should be targeting? I'd thrown out the idea to Joe as a concept. If they could find the Jason Zucker of their defense, a veteran who comes in and works on a number of levels, that'd be great. But, you know, that doesn't exactly strike me as the kind of trade you normally make for the 9th pick.
Yeah, I think it should definitely be in consideration for sure where they are right now. I think the likelihood of it happening is probably slim, only for a couple reasons. One, just teams really just don't trade those top 10 picks, like the actual picks themselves. I think the last one that happened was the Brinket, and then before that was like Bo Horvat or something like a long time ago. So it just doesn't happen very often. So that's one thing working against you. And then also I just feel like this class, you know, for me, once you got the top 3, I guess maybe top 5, it's nothing spectacular. So it's hard for me to believe that some team is really going to want to come in there and get that 9th pick to go after somebody. I mean, it does only take one team to fall in love with the prospect and they really want him. So that could happen. And then then you got to find the team that wants to do that. You know, there were people yesterday that mentioned like Jason Robertson, like use that to go get him. But, you know, Dallas doesn't want that pick. They're in a cup window. They don't care about the 9th overall pick. So you really got to find a team that is looking to move somebody halfway decent that can help you, and then the other part is would have the desires to get their hands on that 9th pick.
Right. You almost need a team that's starting over a little bit. And I don't know if you've done this even for other ideas where you trade young pieces, even if it's not the 9th pick, but I don't know. Is there a team that comes to mind for that they should be targeting to make a deal with this offseason, even if it's not just for the 9th pick?
Well, the one team I thought about last night that I talked about on the podcast, I did a little bit, and it involves the 9th pick, is the Islanders. I think the Islanders are in a spot where, you know, nobody really does that hardcore rebuild anymore, you know, at least not all the way tear it down, but some sort of reset, and, you know, they're changing their front office, and then they win the first overall pick, and, you know, are they a team that would maybe have the desire, okay, we get 1 and then we get 9, and then, you know, I've gone back and forth with, let's say they give 1 and they're going to pick Matthew Schaefer at 1. Well, would that make Noah Dobson more or less available? I go back and forth on it because I can make arguments on both sides. But let's say it makes them more available. Then can you go to them and say, hey, I mean, it wouldn't be just 9, but take 9, you get 2 top 10 picks, and then formulate the rest of your package around that and, you know, get a Dobson trade done somehow, some way. You know, that's something I kicked around again. I don't know how likely that would be, but, you know, there's not many teams really that fit the criteria that I kind of laid out, but the Islanders, you know, are one of those teams that you could talk to about that type of scenario.
So you're mentioning Noah Dobson, defenseman of the Islanders. I guess getting to the Sabres side of this, what should Kevin Adams be in the market for? What is the number one goal of the offseason for them to figure out to get them to where they need to be? And in your opinion, Chad, how far are they from being in that spot in the playoffs?
I don't think they're that far. What I would focus on is improving your defense. And maybe it's not just your blue line, which I think does need to improve, and maybe the area you should focus on. But I think it's your overall team defense. So if you're not, if you're not going to go after a defenseman, which I think they will, but let's say they look to the forward side of things, well, you have to understand the makeup of your roster. So your roster is built with a lot of finishing forwards that maybe aren't the best two-way forwards throughout your lineup. So what I would look for is, more of a playmaking. You don't need a finisher, someone who distributes the puck well. They can get it to your finishers. And then also getting a guy that is good in the defensive zone that you can utilize up in that top 9 or top 6 that, is responsible defensively in the sense of how they use Benson at the end of the season, where he's that distributor, he's the forechecker, and he's very good defensively. So I think they need that type of player. And then also I think even if they keep the pick, that's the kind of type of player they should be looking for too. And it's really hard to get these kids, and I understand, they're not going to come for 3 or 4 years, and you want to pick best available because they're not going to know what you need at this point, but their prospect system is full, same thing, of more of those finisher, shooter-type players that they could really use some sort of playmaker, two-way guy, either on their actual roster or in their prospect pool too.
Talking about that defenseman, how important specifically would it be for a partner for Power? We've talked about for maybe if it's been 2-3 years now, who plays with him on the right and targeting a veteran for that spot, which, it's Ben Jokiharju and he's gone. So for you, how much should... I don't even know, though. You just bring in a right-shot defenseman, and is there a specific skill set they should be targeting for that in mind?
Yeah, I think the thing, too, we have to think about is it doesn't have to be a right-shot defenseman. Both Darlene and Power have played on the right, and Kevin Adams has said a few times, and I think he may be tipping his hand, that their internal data says that Power plays better on the right side than the left at times, and I looked into that myself, but I don't have any reason to believe he'd be lying about it. So, yeah, ideally you'd get a right-handed defenseman, but if that's not there, then you can go for a left-handed defenseman. Like Gavrikov is somebody in free agency that I think could really fit, because you could put him with Power or Darlene. He's played those minutes. He's played in big moments. And I think he does have that kind of profile you talked about, somebody who is good at entry defense. I think can, is good positionally around the net, a little bit of a bigger size, kind of all those profiles. He's not the best, exit defender, which I think you can deal with that because you have Darlene and Power. But really, if you're looking for a profile, I think it's somebody that profiles similar to Bernard Docker. Does that work with Power? So obviously, maybe you want a little bit more talent and a little bit better defensively than Bernard Docker, but I think that'd be the type of profile that you'd be aiming for when you bring somebody in.
Chatting with Chad DeDedominicis of ExpectedBuffalo.com in the Sabres offseason. How about goal, Chad, before we wrap up here? Luukkonen is, back to being a wild card. Levi, I'm watching and seeing the results in Rochester and, lighting candles every night that he can be this good in the NHL. What's the best plan? Is it probably just those two and hoping that Levi is finally ready?
Yeah, I think that's the realistic plan, is it'll be those two. It's tough to think of something else that you could get. Really, I just don't think this team is in a position to give up assets and use cap space to bring in some big, name goaltender. Unless Luukkonen has to go out the door too in that scenario. But I don't know if a Luukkonen and somebody else, let's say Demko, that's $5 million, but that's a chunkier cap space you're eating into, and we can get into the whole cap space utilization conversation, but that's just not somewhere where I would do that. And then you get into the question of, if you get somebody along the same lines of Luukkonen, in the sense that there's really only a few goalies in this league that are consistently year in and year out good, if you give up assets for somebody that, again, it's just going to be another question mark. Is it just as likely that Luukkonen bounces back as Demko would stay healthy for a full season, or really anybody you get? That's the question they have to kick around. So that's why I think ultimately it's more likely it's just going to be Luukkonen and Levi. And, they're going to hope that works, and I don't have the most confidence. They've tried that twice now, and it didn't go well. And maybe the third time's a charm. I don't know. But yeah, the free agent market on goaltending is pretty poor now with a couple guys signing. So, the options are kind of limited there. So I just think that's what they'll end up.
On that cap conversation, it's going to go up, like 95-ish is usually the projection for now. With McLeod to sign and Peterka, Quinn to a lesser extent, Byram obviously. How close do you think they'll be to being a cap team without doing anything external?
If they just re-sign everybody, they're going to just by default, I think, be up near there. They can mitigate that, but if they dump off Clifton, and then I think they're going to try to move Samuelson, so that in itself right there is $7-8 million you can drop off your books, and that would go, part of that or most of that would go to Peterka and Byram. I don't think they're giving anybody long term here, so I think whatever they hand out are going to be bridge contracts. Whoever does stay out of that group that you mentioned. You're looking probably in the 6-7 range even on a bridge. So in theory, they should be closer. But we'll see. We thought the same thing this year when they, bought out Skinner, that they're going to use that money, and they never did. So I guess we'll have to see if they actually do.
Is one of those more of a question than others for if they stay, the guys that are RFAs?
I would say Byram is probably the more questionable one, but I think Peterka can be in that conversation too. I go back and forth with what they're going to do there. I think the most likely outcome for Peterka is that they just give him a 2-year bridge contract probably, and then kick that down the road and deal with it then. Byram, I think, is the one that they could look to move. They used him. He was in trade conversations last year, with Pettersson and then some other stuff too. And they took away from Darlene to kind of see how that worked, and we all saw how poorly that went. So I think there's a couple signs when you look at it there that he'll probably be the one that's more available. But, again, this team is super hard to predict at times, so who really knows?
Chad DeDedominicis, Expected Buffalo Podcast and ExpectedBuffalo.com. Thanks, Chad.
Yeah, no problem, guys.
All right.